I stopped feeling pain 7 years ago, which should have terrified me more than it did, because the day you stop feeling your own flesh rotting off your bones is the day you realize you've become something that shouldn't exist. Something that walks and talks and fights, but isn't human anymore. My name was Marcus Typhon, once a proud space marine of the Emperor's XIVTH Legion, the Dusk Raiders, and later the Death Guard. Now I don't know what I am. A walking corpse. A vessel for diseases that would kill entire worlds. A plague marine in service to Grandfather Nurgle, the god of decay and despair. And the worst part isn't what I've become. It's that I remember what I was before. And I remember exactly how I got here. Let me tell you a story about transformation, about betrayal, about how the greatest warriors humanity ever created became its most terrifying enemies. Let me tell you what it's really like inside the Death Guard, because the propaganda and the legends don't tell you the truth. They don't tell you about the smell, about the constant itching under your armor that you can never scratch, about the voice of Nurgle whispering in your head, promising relief from suffering if you just surrender completely. They don't tell you that becoming a plague marine isn't a choice you make in a single moment, but a slow corruption that happens piece by piece, until one day you wake up and realize you're not who you were yesterday. And you haven't been for a long time. The transformation didn't start when I thought it did. I used to believe it began on the plague ships during our journey through the warp, when Mortarion, our Primarch, made his deal with Nurgle to save us from the diseases that were killing us. But I was wrong. The corruption started much earlier, in small compromises and bitter resentments that grew like infections in our souls, weakening us long before the physical changes began. We were already dying inside before our bodies started to rot. I joined the Death Guard during the Great Crusade, back when we were still called the Dusk Raiders, before Mortarion took command and renamed us. Those were different times, when we believed in the Emperor's vision of a united humanity spanning the galaxy, when we thought we were building something that would last forever. I was young then, barely 200 years old by Space Marine standards, fresh from the transformation process that turns normal humans into 7-foot-tall super soldiers. The surgery and the gene seed implantation and the hypno-conditioning that rewires your brain to turn you into a living weapon. The Death Guard had a reputation even then. We were the endurance fighters, the ones who would march through any condition, survive any environment, outlast any enemy. While other legions like the Emperor's Children focused on perfection, or the World Eaters focused on aggression, we focused on pure stubborn refusal to die. We would walk through poison gas that killed normal humans in seconds. We would fight in radiation zones that turned other soldiers into screaming puddles of mutation. We would keep advancing when any sane army would have retreated, because we were Death Guard, and Death Guard didn't know how to quit. Mortarion, our Primarch, embodied this philosophy completely. He was a towering figure, even among Primarchs, pale as a corpse with sunken eyes that seemed to stare through you into something beyond. He'd been raised on a death world called Barbarous, a planet shrouded in poisonous fog where humanity lived in the valleys and monsters ruled the mountains. He'd spent his entire childhood fighting toxic environments and terrible creatures, learning to survive in conditions that would kill anyone else. And when he took command of our legion, he made sure we shared his experience, his endurance, his refusal to ever show weakness. We loved him for it. We would have followed him anywhere, and eventually, we did. Straight into damnation. The Horus heresy began with promises of freedom. Horus, the War Master, the greatest of all Primarchs, announced that he was rebelling against the Emperor, claiming that the Emperor had betrayed the Space Marines and was planning to abandon us once the Great Crusade was finished. Some legions joined him immediately, seduced by promises of power or driven by old grievances. Others stayed loyal to the Emperor without question. We Death Guard found ourselves somewhere in between, uncertain and divided, until Mortarion made his choice. He chose Horus. He chose rebellion. And because we were Death Guard, because our entire culture was built on following orders and never questioning our commanders, most of us followed him. I followed him. I raised my weapon against my former brothers, against the Imperium I'd sworn to protect, because my Primarch commanded it. Because I trusted him to know better than I did. Because questioning orders wasn't something Death Guard did. We spent years fighting in the heresy, battling against loyalist space marines and Imperial army forces, pushing toward Terra where the Emperor sat on his golden throne. We won victories and suffered defeats, and slowly I began to notice something changing in our legion. We were becoming more brutal, more willing to use weapons and tactics we'd once considered dishonorable. Biological weapons that caused agonizing deaths. Chemical attacks that violated every rule of warfare. Mordorion justified it all as necessary, claiming we needed every advantage to defeat the Emperor's forces. And we believed him, because we always believed him. Then came the journey that changed everything. We were traveling through the warp, heading toward Terra for the final assault, when Nurgle, the chaos god of disease and decay, noticed us. The warp is a dimension of madness and nightmare, where the laws of physics don't apply and reality bends to the whims of malevolent entities that feed on emotion. Traveling through it is always dangerous, but usually space marine ships can make the journey quickly enough to avoid the worst hazards. Usually. Nurgle had other plans for us. He wanted the Death Guard for his own, wanted to corrupt Mortarian's tough, enduring warriors into servants of decay. So he trapped our fleet in the warp, surrounding our ships with his essence, and then he began introducing diseases. At first, it seemed like nothing unusual. A few Marines reported feeling sick, which was strange because Space Marines don't get sick. Our enhanced biology makes us immune to almost every disease known to humanity. But these weren't normal diseases. These were supernatural plagues, infections that came directly from Nurgle himself, designed specifically to overcome our enhanced immune systems. And they worked. The first plague caused your skin to blister and peel, leaving you looking like you'd been burned alive. The second filled your lungs with thick mucus that made every breath feel like drowning. The third attacked your nervous system, causing pain so intense that even Space Marines, warriors trained to ignore agony, screamed continuously. And they just kept coming, disease after disease, each one worse than the last, spreading through our ships until every single Marine was infected with something. We tried everything to stop it. Our apothecaries, the medical specialists of our legion, worked desperately to find cures or treatments, but nothing worked. Traditional medicine was useless against supernatural plagues. We prayed to the Emperor for help, but the warp blocked our psychic communication, and even if it hadn't, the Emperor was far away on Terra, too distant to aid us. We were trapped in Nurgle's domain, slowly dying from 1,000 different infections, and there was nothing we could do about it. I remember the pain. Even now, 7 years later, I remember how it felt when the plagues were killing me. It wasn't like getting shot or stabbed, which are clean injuries that hurt intensely but in ways you can understand and endure. This was different. This was your own body betraying you, every cell becoming an enemy, every organ failing in new and horrible ways. My skin would split open spontaneously, leaking fluids that smelled like rotting meat. My bones ached with a deep, grinding pain that never stopped. My stomach cramped and churned, rejecting everything I tried to eat. And the worst part was the helplessness, knowing that my enhanced Space Marine body, the body that was supposed to be superior to normal humans in every way, couldn't fight these diseases any better than a normal person could. We were dying. Not quickly, but slowly, piece by piece, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. That's when Mordorion made his deal. After months of watching his son suffer, after trying every possible solution and failing, after refusing to surrender for as long as he possibly could, Mordorion finally called out to Nurgle and begged for the pain to stop. And Nurgle answered. He offered Mordorion a bargain. Join Nurgle, serve Nurgle, become Nurgle's champion, and in return, Nurgle would end the suffering. The diseases wouldn't kill us anymore. They would become part of us instead, transforming us into something new, something that could survive anything because we would be decay itself. Mordorion accepted. He had no choice, really. It was watch his entire legion die in agony, or surrender to Nurgle and at least keep them alive in some form. He chose survival, even if survival meant damnation. And the moment he accepted Nurgle's offer, everything changed. The pain stopped. Instantly. Completely. After months of constant agony, suddenly there was nothing. It felt like a miracle, like being saved, like prayers being answered. The diseases were still there, still active in our bodies, but they didn't hurt anymore. Instead, they felt almost comfortable, like old friends settling in for a long visit. And that should have been our first warning that something was very, very wrong. The physical transformation began immediately. Our armor, our beautiful gray and white Death Guard armor that we'd maintained and honored for centuries, began to change. The metal corroded and rusted, turning green and brown with decay. Horns and spikes grew from it in random places. The surface became pitted and rough, like something that had been buried underground for decades and then dug up again. And we couldn't stop it from happening. The corruption spread through the metal itself, transforming it into something that looked ancient and diseased. Our bodies changed too. My skin, which had already been damaged by the plagues, began to rot properly. Flesh turned green and gray, developing lesions that oozed constantly. But instead of falling off like dead tissue should, it stayed attached, becoming tougher and more resilient even as it decayed. My muscles swelled, growing larger and stronger despite being partially decomposed. Horns began growing from my skull, pushing through the skin without causing pain. And inside my body, my organs were reorganizing themselves, becoming more efficient even as they rotted, learning to function in ways that violated every law of biology I'd ever learned. The most disturbing part was watching it happen to my brothers. Seeing Marines I'd fought beside for decades transform into walking corpses, their faces swelling and distorting, their bodies bloating with gases and fluids, their armor becoming covered in rust and filth. Some of them grew extra limbs or eyes in strange places. Others developed massive tumors that pulsed with diseased life. A few began to merge partially with their armor, the metal and flesh fusing together into something that was neither mechanical nor organic but both at once. And we didn't care. That was the most terrifying realization. We should have been horrified by what was happening to us. We should have been fighting against the transformation with every ounce of our will. But Nurgle's influence was already working on our minds as well as our bodies, changing how we thought and felt. The decay and corruption that would have disgusted us before now seemed natural, even comforting. The diseases that were transforming us felt like gifts rather than curses. And the voice of Nurgle, constantly present in the back of our minds, kept whispering that this was good, that we were being blessed, that we were becoming something greater than we'd been before. When we finally emerged from the warp, we were no longer the Death Guard. We were Plague Marines, servants of Nurgle, walking embodiments of disease and decay. And we continued toward Terra, ready to spread our grandfather's gifts to the rest of humanity. The siege of Terra was where I truly understood what I'd become. We attacked the Imperial Palace alongside the other traitor legions, trying to breach the walls and reach the Emperor himself. And everywhere we went, we brought plague with us. Not just physical diseases, though those were terrible enough, but spiritual corruption that rotted everything it touched. Buildings would decay and crumble as we passed. Plants would wither and die. Water would turn foul and poisonous. And people, normal unaugmented humans, would start showing symptoms of Nurgle's plagues just from being near us, their bodies breaking down as the decay spread from us to them like a contagious curse. I remember fighting a squad of Imperial Fists, loyalist space marines defending the palace walls. They were good warriors, well-trained and determined, and under normal circumstances, they might have been our equals in combat. But they weren't fighting normal enemies. They were fighting walking disease vectors, warriors who couldn't be stopped by normal means. I took bolt rounds to the chest that would have killed me before my transformation, and I barely noticed. My rotting flesh absorbed the impacts, healing almost as fast as it was damaged, because decay and regeneration had become the same process in my corrupted body. But worse than the physical combat was what happened afterward. The Imperial Fists we killed didn't just die. Their bodies immediately began to rot at an accelerated rate, breaking down in minutes instead of days, becoming breeding grounds for new plagues that would spread to anyone who tried to recover them. We were turning our enemies into biological weapons just by killing them. And I felt nothing about it. No guilt, no horror, no remorse. Just satisfaction that we were succeeding in our mission, spreading Nurgle's blessings to those who didn't appreciate them yet. The heresy failed, ultimately. Horus was killed by the Emperor in single combat, and we traitor legions were forced to retreat into the Eye of Terror, a massive warp storm where reality breaks down completely and the Chaos Gods rule absolutely. We've been there ever since, 10,000 years by the Imperium's calendar, though time works differently in the warp and it feels like much less to me. Sometimes days pass in what seems like hours. Sometimes centuries pass in what feels like weeks. Time has stopped meaning anything, just like pain stopped meaning anything, just like most human concepts stopped meaning anything once we became plague marines. Life in the Eye of Terror is different from anything in the material universe. The demon worlds we inhabit are shaped by Nurgle's wool, covered in swamps and jungles of diseased vegetation, filled with creatures that are part demon and part disease, existing in states somewhere between life and death. The sky is usually green or brown, filled with clouds of spores and toxic gases. The ground is soft and spongy, made of layers of decaying organic matter that have built up over millennia. And everywhere, everything is rotting, but never dying completely, locked in a permanent state of decay that goes on forever. We build fortresses that look like they're falling apart, walls covered in slime and rust, towers that lean at impossible angles but never collapse. We maintain our war gear in ways that would horrify a normal tech marine, letting rust and corruption spread across the metal because it makes the equipment stronger, more resilient, blessed by Nurgle's power. My bolter is covered in verdigrease and looks like it should have stopped working centuries ago, but it fires more reliably than it did when it was new, because Nurgle's blessing ensures that all tools used in his service will continue functioning no matter how deteriorated they appear. We organize ourselves into warbands led by plague champions, veteran marines who have earned Nurgle's favor through long service and dedication to spreading decay. These champions often display the most extreme mutations, their bodies so transformed by disease that they barely look human anymore, but they are also the most powerful warriors in our forces, blessed with supernatural strength and resilience that makes them nearly unstoppable in combat. Above the champions are the sorcerers, plague casters who wield Nurgle's magic directly, summoning clouds of disease, animating corpses to fight as zombies, calling demons from the warp to join our battles. They're terrifying to fight against because they don't just kill you, they corrupt you, turning your own body into an enemy that attacks you from the inside with supernatural plagues. And above everyone except Mortarion himself are the Lords of Contagion, legendary warriors who embody Nurgle's philosophy completely. The most famous is Typhus, the Herald of Nurgle, who leads the most powerful warband and has spread more plagues than any other plague marine in history. He's so corrupted that he barely looks like he was ever a space marine, his body massively swollen and covered in hives that continuously spawn new diseases, his armor transformed into something that seems more organic than mechanical. They say Typhus can't be killed by conventional means, that he's become so intertwined with Nurgle's power that destroying his body just means he'll regenerate somewhere else. I don't know if that's true, but I've never seen anything that could stop him. Our daily existence, if you can call it that when time doesn't work properly, revolves around preparing for raids into the material universe. Nurgle constantly sends us on missions to spread his plagues, targeting specific worlds or systems that he wants to corrupt. Sometimes we attack imperial worlds, bringing diseases that kill billions and transform the survivors into plague zombies or willing servants of Nurgle. Sometimes we attack other Chaos warbands, because Nurgle is always competing with the other Chaos gods for power and influence. And sometimes we attack Xenos civilizations, spreading decay to alien species that thought they were safe from human diseases. The preparation for a raid involves rituals that would seem bizarre to anyone not corrupted by chaos. We gather in great plague pits, standing in pools of diseased fluid while plague casters chant prayers to Nurgle. We expose ourselves to new diseases deliberately, testing which ones are most effective, seeing how they interact with our already corrupted biology. We craft plague weapons, bolts coated with supernatural toxins, blades that carry infections that can rot ceramite armor, grenades filled with spores that spread fast-acting plagues across entire areas. And we feed. This is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of life as a plague marine. We still need to eat, even though our bodies are partially dead. But normal food doesn't work anymore. Instead, we consume things that would kill normal humans instantly. rotting meat crawling with maggots, toxic sludge from industrial waste, disease-ridden corpses that have been decomposing for weeks. These things not only sustain us but make us stronger, feeding the plagues within our bodies, helping them evolve and adapt. I remember the first time I ate something truly disgusting after my transformation, a piece of flesh that was more mold than meat. My old human instincts screamed at me to vomit, to reject this poison. But my corrupted body welcomed it, absorbed it, turned it into strength. And I felt Nurgle's pleasure at my acceptance, like a parent proud of a child who's finally learned an important lesson. The psychological changes are hardest to describe because they happen gradually, so slowly that I didn't notice them until they were complete. I used to have normal human emotions. Love for my battle brothers. Pride in my accomplishments. Anger at enemies. Fear in dangerous situations. But these have all transformed into something different. What I feel now isn't exactly emotion in the human sense. It's more like the echo of emotions, memories of how I used to feel, filtered through Nurgle's influence and twisted into new shapes. I still care about my fellow Plague Marines, but it's not brotherhood anymore. It's more like the affection you'd feel for fellow victims of the same disease, people who understand your suffering because they share it. We don't talk about it much because talking requires acknowledging that something is wrong, and we've all accepted that nothing is wrong, that this is how things should be. I still take satisfaction in successful missions, but it's not pride anymore. It's the pleasure of watching diseases spread, of seeing healthy flesh become corrupted, of knowing that we're transforming the galaxy one infection at a time into something that reflects Nurgle's vision of eternal decay. And I don't feel fear at all anymore. How can you fear death when you're already dead? How can you fear pain when you can't feel it? How can you fear corruption when you are corruption? The things that would terrify a normal human or even a normal space marine are just curiosities to me now, interesting phenomena to observe but not to worry about. The Imperium's propaganda claims we're monsters driven mad by chaos, that we've lost all trace of our humanity and exist only to spread suffering. That's not quite accurate, though I understand why they think that. We haven't lost our humanity. We've transformed it into something else, something that can exist comfortably in conditions that would destroy normal humans. We're adapted to a universe where decay is the natural state, where everything is always rotting, where death is not an ending but a transformation into something new. Nurgle teaches that decay is not something to fear or fight against. It's natural, inevitable, and ultimately beneficial. Everything in the universe is constantly breaking down, from stars to planets to living creatures. Fighting against this process is futile and causes unnecessary suffering. But accepting it, embracing it, even celebrating it, brings peace. This is why Nurgle is called Grandfather, why his followers speak of his love and generosity. He offers freedom from the fear of death, from the pain of deterioration, from the desperate struggle to maintain youth and health in a universe that's constantly trying to kill you. When I explain this to people, they usually think I'm trying to justify what I've become, trying to rationalize my corruption with philosophy that makes it sound less evil. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to explain how Plague Marines think, how we see the universe, why we do what we do. Because if you don't understand that, if you just dismiss us as mad monsters, you'll never understand the real danger we represent. The danger isn't that we're insane. It's that we're not. We're perfectly lucid, completely aware of what we're doing and why. We spread diseases because we genuinely believe it's beneficial, that we're sharing Nurgle's gifts with people who don't know they need them yet. We corrupt and transform because we think corruption and transformation are improvements, stages in an evolutionary process that leads to something better than baseline humanity. And we serve Nurgle because he freed us from pain and fear and despair, gave us purpose and power and the ability to endure anything. This makes us far more dangerous than simple madmen. Madmen can be cured or controlled or simply avoided. But true believers, people who are absolutely convinced they're doing the right thing, are nearly impossible to stop because they'll never stop themselves. They'll keep pushing forward no matter what obstacles they face, convinced that any setback is temporary and any sacrifice is worthwhile in service of their cause. Combat as a Plague Marine is unlike anything I experienced before my transformation. We don't fight like normal space marines anymore. We don't use careful tactics or elegant strategies. We just advance, slowly and inevitably, absorbing damage that would stop other warriors, pushing forward through any opposition until we reach our objectives. Bolter rounds hit us and we keep walking. Plasma burns through our armor and we keep walking. Lost fire and missile strikes and even tank rounds slow us down but don't stop us, because our corrupted bodies heal almost as fast as they're damaged, and the diseases within us are constantly working to keep us functional. The scariest thing about fighting Plague Marines, from what I've heard from Imperial survivors, is the inexorability. Other Chaos Space Marines can be outmaneuvered or outfought. Khorne Berserkers are brutal but predictable, charging straight at you in ways that can be anticipated. Thousand Sun Sorcerers are dangerous but rely on psychic powers that can be disrupted. Emperor's Children are skilled but arrogant, making mistakes you can exploit. But Death Guard just keep coming. You shoot us and we don't stop. You blow off our limbs and we keep fighting with what remains. You land killing shots and we keep moving for minutes or hours before finally falling. And everywhere we go, we leave plague and corruption behind, transforming the battlefield itself into a disease zone that sickens anyone who tries to fight there. I've participated in hundreds of raids over the centuries, attacking Imperial worlds across the galaxy. Each one follows a similar pattern. We arrive in orbit, often in ancient ships that look like they should have fallen apart millennia ago but somehow keep functioning through Nurgle's blessing. We deploy via drop pods or teleportation, landing in areas where we can do maximum damage. And then we start spreading plagues. Sometimes the plagues are physical diseases, biological weapons that spread through the population, killing indiscriminately. These are effective but crude, and usually the Imperium can contain them with extreme quarantine measures and mass executions of infected populations. More insidious are the spiritual plagues, supernatural corruptions that spread through communities like infections, turning people into Nurgle worshippers or driving them to despair and hopelessness. These are harder to fight because they don't show obvious symptoms, and by the time the Imperium realizes what's happening, entire cities might be corrupted beyond saving. The worst raids, from the Imperium's perspective, are the ones where we succeed in establishing permanent corruption. This happens when we manage to corrupt key infrastructure or important locations, turning them into sources of ongoing plague that continue spreading long after we've left. A water treatment plant that now produces poisoned water. A hospital that infects everyone who comes for treatment. A shrine or cathedral that spreads spiritual corruption to everyone who prays there. These create ongoing disasters that the Imperium has to deal with for years or decades, draining resources and manpower that could be used elsewhere. After 10,000 years of this, I've seen more death and suffering than any human mind should be able to hold. I've watched billions die from plagues I helped spread. I've seen worlds transformed into disease-ridden hellscapes where nothing healthy can survive. I've killed loyalist space marines who were probably better men than I ever was, warriors who stayed true to their oaths while I broke mine. And I've done all of this without feeling guilt or remorse or even much interest, because those emotions don't work the same way in me anymore. But here's what the Imperium's propaganda never mentions, what they can't afford to let people know. Joining the Death Guard isn't always forced. Sometimes people choose it. Sometimes humans on Imperial worlds, after seeing what we offer, after learning what Nurgle promises, decide they want to join us. They're tired of the suffering and fear and endless grinding misery of life in the Imperium. They're desperate for relief from pain or sickness. They've lost everything and have nothing left to lose. And when they see Plague Marines, see how we endure anything, how we're free from pain and fear, some of them think that sounds better than what they have. So they offer themselves to Nurgle, and if they're suitable, if they have the right combination of desperation and willingness and potential, they're accepted. They're corrupted and transformed, their bodies rotting while their spirits are freed from suffering. And they become Death Guard, or at least they become cultists who serve the Death Guard, spreading plagues in our name, preparing worlds for our arrival. This is what makes chaos so dangerous. It's not just external conquest. It's internal corruption. The Imperium could survive external threats if it was united and strong. But it's not. It's brittle and cruel and grinding, crushing its own people under impossible burdens, creating the very desperation and suffering that makes chaos appealing. Every world where people live in misery is a potential recruitment ground for chaos. Every person who's lost hope is a potential cultist. And the Imperium creates millions of these people every day through its own policies and indifference. I was loyal once. I believed in the Emperor's vision. I would have died for the Imperium without hesitation. But circumstances and choices and corrupting influences transformed me into something else, something that now fights against everything I once defended. And the tragedy is that I can't even regret it, because regret requires caring about the difference between right and wrong, and Nurgle's corruption has taken that from me along with everything else that made me human. So this is my existence now. I am a plague marine of the Death Guard, a servant of Nurgle, a walking disease in power armor. My body is rotting but won't die. My mind is corrupted but remains functional. My soul is damned but I can't bring myself to care. And I will continue spreading Nurgle's plagues across the galaxy until something finally destroys me completely, or until the universe itself decays into nothing, whichever comes first. The Imperium fights us with every resource at their disposal. They quarantine infected worlds, execute corrupted populations, deploy their most powerful warriors against our warbands. And sometimes they succeed in stopping us, driving us back into the Eye of Terror, purging our corruptions with fire and faith. But we always return, because Nurgle is patient and decay is inevitable. Every victory the Imperium achieves is temporary. Every world they save is just delaying the inevitable. Eventually, given enough time, everything will rot. Everything will decay. Everything will become what we already are. And when that day comes, when the whole galaxy is finally consumed by the corruption we spread, Nurgle will be satisfied. And we will have served our purpose. Until then, I continue. I raid and I corrupt and I spread disease, not because I enjoy it particularly, but because it's what I am now. The transformation that began in those plague ships 10,000 years ago is complete. I am no longer Marcus Typhon, loyal space marine of the Death Guard. I am something else. Something that should not exist but does. Something that walks between life and death, spreading decay wherever it goes. And my hands don't shake anymore. They haven't shaken in 7 years. And that's the most terrible thing of all.